Well, good morning to this webinar on Cripps Pink, best practice protocol for preventing internal browning. Those of you that don't know me, I'm Wiehann Steyn from Hortgro, more particularly Hortgro Science, managing the research for the industry. And with me is Dr Elke Crouch from Stellenbosch University, and also the chair in applied, well, not applied, sorry, in postharvest physiology of deciduous fruit. And yes, we'll be discussing, like you know, Cripps Pink browning. It's been a great season so far. As most of you will know, it's looking good on the tree, but now we need to be able to ensure that all the fruit end up at a very satisfied consumer. All right, and that's obviously the challenge, and that's why we're having this webinar this morning. I just need to say it's an association between Hortgro and Pink Lady South Africa. And the format of the webinar this morning will be an interview. I'll be interviewing Elke, asking her some questions. And then when we're done, there'll be opportunity for you to also ask questions of Elke. You can also send through any questions you may have, whether using the chat function on Zoom during the proceedings. And Tia and Marinu is sitting in the background running the operations. They'll then just share those questions with me, and we'll also address them at the end of the proceedings. Okay, so we'll just kick straight on, and I'll start off with the questions. So Elke, good morning.
Good morning.
Chatting about internal browning of Pink Lady. I'm aware there's different types of internal browning. Can you maybe just tell us a bit more about the different types of Pink Lady, or Cripps Pink, sorry, internal browning?
Yeah, there are actually many types, but the...
Sorry, Elke, and I'll also just ask Martin to share. I think you've got a slide showing the different types. I'll ask him to share it so that everybody can see it while you discussing the different types.
There we go.
Can you maybe make it full view? There we go.
Okay. So the main type of browning that we do get in, or we used to get in Cripps Pink from South Africa, actually, or in South Africa, after storage, was diffuse browning. So we don't get diffuse browning that often anymore, and I'll get to that point later on. Then radial browning, in some seasons we get it more than in others. And then there's a combination browning, which you can see on the picture is kind of a combination of the two, and the factors influencing it is also a combination of the two. Then there is also CO2 browning, and that is when one has levels of carbon dioxide that is higher than 1%, and especially in fruit that is also more mature in controlled atmosphere. So those are the main types. There are others as well, although these are the main ones.
Okay. Elke, so what's the main pre-harvest and post-harvest factors that cause diffuse browning?
So diffuse browning, we noticed, is a kind of a chilling injury. So, and it occurs in fruit that is more mature. So if in the trials that we've done over the years, we typically find it where you harvest over 40% or 50% and you store it for long term, and especially at lower temperatures, lower than 1 or at 1. Without any stepwise cooling. So then it can occur. If one stepwise cools, there is no diffuse browning, or very little diffuse browning. That's why we used to in the olden days store at minus 0.5 degrees Celsius, and that's why that was the main type of browning, sometimes in our trials up to 80%, with very little diffuse radial browning. But nowadays, it is actually not that big a problem anymore, except for if people still store at single temperature and don't stepwise, or the fruit is over mature and they store it for too long.
Okay, so would you say in a season where there's a lack of winter chill, where one's got greater or mixed maturity on the tree, or where we struggle to get those last fruit to colour up, that the risk of diffuse browning might be higher?
Yes, it might be higher. So those fruits should ideally not be stored for long term. One can get diffuse browning after only 3 months of storage in a controlled atmosphere. So those fruits shouldn't be stored long term if one's waiting. And maybe one should use something like reflective mulch or something that brings colour sooner, because the inside of the canopy generally is, in any case, at the same harvest, more mature in Cripps Pink.
Okay, all right. So that's a good advice, reflective mulching. One harvests the fruit separately anyways already.
Yes,
So that's diffuse browning in terms of pre-harvest and post-harvest causes. What's the pre-harvest and post-harvest cause of radial browning, Elke?
Radial browning is a bit more difficult. We are going to do some more research on radial browning, but it seems that radial browning, if one harvests, there are quite a few factors involved. So, like I said, in some seasons you see it, and in some not. Liana, way back when Battler, now Low, did a MSc where she saw that in the seasons with the first 0 to 50 days after full bloom and 50 to 100 days after full bloom, if those temperatures are lower than normal, then the likelihood of getting it is bigger. So that is the one factor. And we're doing research to see whether one can quantify that statistically. So one calculates kind of a risk. So that is an ongoing and a kind of a long-term trial. Currently we've got like 100 farms on that. So to see whether one can see a rate of change of maturity, and that's where the maturity also comes in. Interestingly, radial browning, we found that if you harvest at the correct maturity and stepwise cooling as well, you don't find radial browning either. However, if you harvest too early, and the farms were harvested too early in our trials, and you had single regime temperature, like at 1 degree Celsius, then that radial browning came out. So, so stepwise is really important for both types of browning.
Okay, so there's definitely a maturity component then to both, even though it's more of a factor in the fuse.
Yes.
And would you say the fuse is more preventable in terms of, you know, if one harvests the correct maturity and sort appropriately?
Yes.
Okay, radial browning is more the problem because it's a big climatic component.
Yes, we're trying to kind of see whether that is true, but it seems like when you stepwise, the chances of getting radial is also less.
Okay, so there is something one can do about it, and that's a good thing to know. So let's just go now to control measures. You've already mentioned some of them. You've said the fuse browning. If one can try to color up those inside fruit earlier, that'll be beneficial. Obviously, you know, separating fruit of different maturities, when one try to market them, different marketing strategies for those. What else can one do for the fuse browning? Is that basically it?
That's basically it. So if you're still long-term and you stepwise cool, the trials we've done, we've used 1-MCP and it really worked well. But the stepwise cooling, the fruit was actually, the quality was much better than the fruit that was stored at a single temperature regime. So that's probably the most single useful thing. And then it helps for soft scald as well and scald. So it's kind of a win-win for everything, yeah. Okay,
but I think you could stop the share, actually. Yeah, so people can see Elke. Yes, and so that's what you could do. You've already mentioned step down, so step down is also the main thing for radial browning.
Yes, I would say so, to reduce the risk. In the years that we've done it, it reduced the risk significantly compared to the 1 degree Celsius one. Yeah.
So what would you prescribe as a good step down cooling regime?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. There are so many out there, and I think a lot more research needs to be done on stepwise cooling, but the ones we tested were starting at 4, 3 and 2, and actually all of those had less diffuse browning, radial browning, combination browning compared to the single temperature regime. So we started with 4, 3 and 2. From other defects, the 3 degrees one did the best. What we did was we stored for 30 days at 3 degrees, 30 days at 2 degrees, 30 days at 1 degree, and the rest at 1 degree. So, but there are many variations out there. So I would say that the other most important thing is to keep your CO2 levels below 1%. So if you're going to start high, one needs to check that and use scrubbers. And yeah, so maybe if the first part is too long, at higher temperatures, keep it shorter and then bring it down to sooner. But yeah, so 4 degrees, 3 degrees, 1 degree, or then 3 degrees, 2 degrees, 1 degree. Yeah.
Any of those would be better than
nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah, okay. Than the 1 degree, or forced air cooling is also not advisable.
So you do want to step down. So yes, and I'm a grower and I'm harvesting. It looks like we're going to have a warmish April, and I harvest my apples and it's 30 degrees, you know, even higher. And, you know, those outside fruit can get quite hot. Yes. So what do we do now with those fruit?
Gentle, treat them gentle. Gentle, you don't force air cooling. You do room cooling and you stepwise them. And get them to 4 degrees at least fairly soon. And while you do that, check that the CO2 levels don't go high. Yeah.
Okay, so it seems that the common theme is you want to be slow in terms of
slower, but not
too slow, because if you're too slow, then it's
you're going to get greasiness and all sorts of things.
Okay. So it's to find that middle ground. Okay, but yeah, good. So that helps. I think, just thinking from a pre-harvest perspective myself, I think they'll move to dwarf rootstocks and trees with a simpler canopy, with no inside and outside really. Okay, that should, I guess, help with diffuse browning too. If one, limit the variation maturity that we've got on the tree.
Yeah, it limits the variation as long as your trees don't stress, because stress makes that your fruit are more mature. So often, if it depends on your soil type, how you irrigate, are you dwarfing rootstocks, are those trees more stressed? So not necessarily. But if you harvest correctly, it should make a big difference, but one just needs to always keep in mind where are those rootstocks planted. It's not as simple as that as well, because there might be unstressed conditions.
Okay. Yeah. Now talking about that, with different areas, regions, be it more or less risk of internal browning, and with different orchards, could different orchards be at more or less risk of internal browning?
I'm sure that might be the case. However, in our 10 farms or orchards that we did over regions, and I know 10 is not a lot, but we found clear differences in maturity. Where the maturity was even, in the 1 year where the maturity was even, there was no differences in the farm. So maturity trumps everything, maturity and stepwise cooling. So there's definitely something to be done everywhere. We in this new trial that we are doing over 95 farms, we're going to see what the temperature effect is on those lower, when you've got a season or an area with lower temperatures than normal, maybe there is a higher risk, but we still need to establish that.
So talking about a new trial, what trials do you have at the moment running on Cripps Pink?
Yeah, so the one with the climatic factors, where we look at the temperatures, pre-harvest temperatures, and we see at the rate of change of maturity, because maturity is related, and then to see whether the density of the fruit are different, and maybe that changes the radial browning. So the one side, the rate of maturity, and the others, on the other side, maybe the density or the radial browning. And the other trial we have is a DCA-CF controlled atmosphere storage, because actually the stepwise did so well. We stored fruit for 9 months. Not that we advise it at this point, but we want to see whether doing DCA-CF with chlorophyll fluorescence actually works even better than the CA that we tried. So, and it works really well with Granny Smith. So on the other hand, it sometimes can cause core flash kind of symptoms. So we need to see whether that works.
The radial browning, 95 orchards, that's quite a lot. Have you managed to get all the orchards you want? And what exactly will be doing in that trial, Elke?
It's just a mammoth task, and actually they've helped me a lot. Ineke currently is in the Landkloof, my MSc student, so she's handling that side. Experienca is handling this side to kind of make sure that all the samples come in pre-harvest. And then the actual harvest will be pretty soon, so according to the optimum harvest maturity. After that, they will be stored. We want to see whether the browning comes out, so we'll store for that specific trial at single temperature. And then we will see whether we will correlate the temperature data with the quality that will come out after 9 months of CA and RA and then shelf life, to see whether there's a quality difference, browning difference, what can one see, and whether the rate of change of ripening is also related to temperature, which it probably will be.
Okay, then I think an obvious question that growers will have now, if you look at the planting, the trees that's going into the orchard now, into the ground, there's a lot of new clones or newer, redder clones of Cripps Pink being planted. And the question is, do one expect these to differ in their sensitivity or susceptibility to internal browning?
Yeah, we've only worked with Rosy Glow as a clone, done trials on them, and there it seemed like maturity is also playing a role. However, we struggled to get browning in that trial, and I'm not sure whether it's just that season or what, but I think if one harvests at the correct maturity, if they colour up sooner and one doesn't harvest too early, then they should actually be very similar, if not actually better, because you don't have to hang them longer. So, but that's just kind of my feel. It's yeah. So yeah, one needs to see.
Okay, all right. So we'll still have to see.
Yeah. But Rosy Glow, yeah, like I said, the same kind of factors play a role.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. This particular season, you prefer the seasons. Is this a high risk or a low risk season for radial and diffuse browning?
Yeah, I wish I knew.
If I put you on a...
Yeah. Put me on the spot, that's fine. Yeah. According to that growing day degrees modelling, actually it's not modelling, looking at different seasons. There were 2 seasons that had high radial browning, 2012 and 2018. And so in the Faber and Elgin area last year was a low to medium risk, because the first part of the season was higher, had higher temperatures compared to the 2012 and 2018, and the second part of the season had a little bit, almost like 2018 or a little bit lower, so it was kind of medium to high risk. So if you get both of those times 0 to 50 days after full bloom and 50 to 100 days after full bloom, if they are both lower, then you get a high risk. So apparently the season is kind of, again, like low to medium, because the second part in some areas might again be like 2018 or very similar to 2018, depends on where you are as well. So yeah, so we need to see whether that model works. And again, one needs to see in your orchard and your area. You can't just say it's a low season, because maybe your temperatures are different than where we looked at it. This was more for the Elgin's area.
Yeah, I think for growers, obviously for marketeers and packers of fruit and exporters, one would try to get to a situation where we've got a handle on radial browning in terms of the seasonal aspects of it, and can give you some sort of prediction in terms of whether it's a high or low. But bear in mind that more work needs to be done on that before we can definitively say that it's high or low. One obviously don't want to put something like that out there, and then it's, you know, then there might be deviations. So okay, so bear that in mind. Elke, just out of interest sake, a bit of physiology. What actually causes the browning? Why do the fruit go brown?
It depends what the drivers are. So, but in all browning, like for instance in diffuse browning, there you got a senescence factor, and you get a long storage time factor, which is a cooling, chilling injury, and you've got a membrane and a vacuole. The vacuole keeps all your phenolics, the things that make wine go red, or it keeps those brown substances contained. And as soon as the membranes get damaged, that leaks out, and it makes a brown color. And sometimes it depends on what the factors causing it. Like for instance, diffuse browning, it's kind of just a light browning everywhere. And radial browning, it's only next to the vascular bundles. So, and then the drivers are maybe different, because we find that radial browning is often in fruit that are CA stored or have either low oxygen, a little bit higher CO2, but it's not CO2 damage. So that might influence the permeability of those membranes, yeah.
Okay. With Fuji browning, would that be different drivers or similar drivers?
Fuji is very interesting as well, and I don't think it is definitely different, although some of the factors how to keep your membrane intact might be the same, like perhaps stepwise cooling. And you get more radial browning again with the CA stored fruit than not, but we can't not store CA. So I think there's a lot more research to be done. And actually there is an MSc student, Anne-Marie Krichler, that is working on Fuji specifically, because I think the drivers are slightly different too. Okay. I think Cripps Pink is much clearer actually than Fuji.
And step down cooling, how would that work? Is it just, does it give the fruit time to adapt, the membranes time to adapt? Is that right?
Yeah, that is the hypothesis, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but also in Anne-Marie's trial, we're looking at the different mechanisms involved. So it's interesting, a student quite a long time back looked at Cripps Pink, and she found that glutathione was higher in the fruit that, not with stepwise, but that were harvested at the right maturity, that in ascorbic acid, and the antioxidants probably help the membrane to kind of against reactive oxygen species or senescence, or what you want to call it, of the membrane, so it helped to keep it intact. Also, it had more polyunsaturated fatty acids, which means it was perhaps more fluid. So our theory would be that it adapts, that the fruit has time to adapt itself to those conditions. Yeah.
Okay, it's good. Yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of physiology also going on behind the scenes in terms of trying to understand browning. Elke, in terms of summarizing, before we now open the floor to the audience members to ask questions, so it seems that there's a big, diffuse browning at least is a big senescence component, yes, it's an over maturity thing, and that's where one can manage it to an extent. Radial browning, seasonal component, you don't want to harvest too early. And then with both these brownings, you want to cool, you know, when the step down cools, you want to cool slowly, but not too slow as to
start too high. So one needs to get it to 4 degrees.
Yes, and you don't want to cool down those fruit too abruptly out of the field. Yeah. All right. So those are quite other things. So everything a grower can do to reduce variation, and try to pick at the optimum maturity, that will all help. And then from the pack house on, it's about that, you know, that relatively slow cooling and so on. Okay, that's good. I think that helps. We also have information, if anybody wants to know more about internal browning, there's been quite a few documents that's been prepared, and Martin can just quickly share again. Just waiting there on him to get the right slide. By the way, you'll noticing Elke and I aren't wearing masks because we're sitting in a nice big room with sufficient airflow. So I think our risk of COVID is fortunately low. And yeah, there you go. Anybody wants to find more information about Cripps Pink best practice guidelines? The guidelines have been distributed by Pink Lady South Africa, but it's also available on the Hortgro website. So if you go and search for the Hortgro website, you'll find it. And then also there's been a fresh quarterly issue number 8, page 22 to 27. But I think there's been an updated version, Elke, since that fresh quarterly, if I'm not mistaken.
Which one? Back in March 2021. No, the fresh quarterly. No, that's
is that the latest? Okay, so that's probably the easiest place to go and find the guidelines. We can also distribute this to all the attendees of the webinar afterwards. Tia is nodding her head in the background to me, so we can distribute it, and you will be able to have a look at it. Okay, Manu, you can stop the share, and we can now give opportunity if anybody's got questions about internal browning and Cripps Pink and clones, or about the treatments, how it works, step down, how to go about it. Any questions you may have, the floor is now open. Manu, let's unmute there. Mense kan, okay. So you can just unmute yourself and ask a question if you have any. Or any comments or remarks, you're welcome to those. So far, no any questions? It seems, Elke, that you've covered the whole field. Nobody wants to know more about step down, or about this particular season, or about different clones. We've got a great opportunity now to chat to Elke. Okay. Okay, Peter.
Can we change the subject a little bit? It's still post-harvest, yeah?
Depends whether we can help you, but yeah, go for it.
A lot of the new varieties, and Cripps Pink was probably one of the first to come through, you know, with a slightly denser, more crisp texture. And a lot of the new varieties that we're looking at now are way more dense and a lot more crisp and crunchy than the varieties we used to work with. And it seems that a lot of them do benefit from step-down cooling. And there are a lot of symptoms that we're seeing now which are like previous symptoms, but are not exactly the same. And I'm more looking to the bitter pit, and we're seeing a number of new varieties. You know, there have been a couple now that have had a few issues. Are we seeing a general change with these denser varieties, which means that we're going to have to step down cool, and we're going to have to make that standard practice going forward, except for the older varieties?
I think that's a fair comment to make. I think actually the Packers Action Group has been working on that particular issue to facilitate that, particularly for this reason. They are definitely more sensitive to fast cooling, also from a soft score point of view, from many point of views. And it's interesting, the quality is actually better, so they can't handle that stress of being cooled down so fast. So yeah.
Yeah, we had a peer group meeting last week, I think it was, a post-harvest peer group meeting, Peter, and you're looking at some of the projects that's being funded at the moment. You know, there's quite a few of them looking at step-down cooling on some of the newer varieties to control defects like soft scald and brownings and so forth. And the treatments being assessed as often treatments that's been devised in the home countries of those varieties where they're from. So there's some New Zealand step-down cooling regimes, you know, that we're looking at for some varieties, and some, you know, American ones for some other varieties. So that seems to be the trend, yeah. But I mean, I think it was also noted in the meeting the other day that you know, there might be certain risks with step-down too.
Yeah, so we need to obviously look at your CO2 levels.
Yeah.
Logistically, is like very difficult. So which one is the right one? So I think there's a lot more research to be done on the finer details of the step down and how to make it work in practice. Yeah.
So Henk, I don't see him there, but Henk, if you're a member of this group, you are attending today, you can also come in there. We had a nice discussion in the peer group the other day about step down and logistic issues around it and the difficulty. And some of those regimes we've been assessing maybe step down too slow. Elke referred to it earlier, that if you're too slow and you're too long at a high temperature, you start to get some of those other senescent issues like greasiness and bitter pit and some other things that might crop out. So thanks for the question, Peter. It's a good one. I don't know if there's anything else anybody wants to add. If not, then we'll sign off. Oh, there's one. Okay. Yeah, Peter?
I think there are no questions because you covered the topic so well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad we did. The guidelines is there for anybody who wants to look at the more details. Alternatively, you can always contact Elke. Elke, may I give your email address?
Yeah.
So if you want to email Elke, if you don't have her email already, I think most of you will have it on your speed dial, so to speak. It's elke@sun.ac.za. So any of those pressing questions, you can also mail Elke, and she can come back to you and address it in more detail. Yeah. I've mentioned earlier when we did the introductions, I've indicated that I've introduced Elke also as a chair in post-harvest physiology at Stellenbosch University, working specifically on deciduous fruit. And that's a recent thing that's come about. Horticulture has decided, well, actually Hortgro has decided that we've got to invest, considering all these new varieties and all the post-harvest issues that we've got to invest in post-harvest capacity. And Elke has been at it now for, I think, a good 18 years, Elke at university. Been doing great work for us on aspects like mealiness and internal browning of different varieties. Scalds also more lately. And establishing the chair is a way to make sure that we maintain the capacity and also the focus on deciduous fruit. So we're very fortunate we can have somebody at the university who's dedicating their time to deciduous issues. Yeah. Corneille, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, Wiehann and Elke, I just wanted to thank you on behalf of Pink Lady South Africa. You are both members of the EXCO, and I just wanted to thank you for this initiative to host this webinar, and also for the work done on the Cripps Pink best practice guidelines and in terms of internal browning. So I just wanted to thank you on behalf of Pink Lady South Africa.
Thanks, Corneille.
Thank you.
On behalf of myself and Elke, I think we just need to also mention that the guideline is an initiative that a lot of people contribute to. The Story Group has actually compiled most of the guidelines based on the research conducted by Elke and also colleagues at Experico like Ilian Taylor. So that's where the best practice guidelines originate from. And ultimately, it's an output of the Story Group, which was an initiative out of the post-harvest pome fruit industry to get all the technical people around the table meeting about monthly, more or less, and discussing issues of common concern. It's a great initiative. Adrian Tron at CFG is at the moment the current chair. If there's anybody who wants to find out more about the Story Group. Okay, if there's no further questions, we've been short and sweet. I see there's 2 chats. I don't know if there's any. Oh, it's you yourself. Okay. If there's no further questions, then I thank all of you for attending. I hope you got your value out of the 30 minutes that we spent time chatting about Cripps Pink internal browning. I wish all of you a good week, and I wish you also a great Cripps Pink crop. And very low risk of internal browning, hopefully. Okay, everybody, signing off. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Amo.